Hi, my name is Pat Adams, a spiritual director and blogger about the spiritual life. The consuming interest of my life has been this: how do we live a life centered in God? And yet deeper still, who am I really? What is my purpose? How do I connect deeply with God? These are the questions I will address in this video series. Here in a nutshell is what Jesus tried to teach us and what he modeled in his life. That everything flows out of a deep relationship with God, out of our loving God with all of ourselves, mind, soul, heart, and body. This is the Great Commandment, which in essence is saying that above all else, above our ego's needs, above the interior voices that are not God within us, above our family's needs, above what anyone else has ever said to us, above what the culture is saying to us, and even above what the church is saying to us, we are to put God first of all in our lives. This is what a surrender to God means. Parenthetically, I'm not down on the church. I love the church and the communities it forms. They help us stay on track with God. But the church's job is to get out of the way of wherever God is taking a person. Jesus was describing a deep dependent, as a child is dependent on his parents for sustenance and guidance, a co-creative, not passive, an enriching, sustaining, purposeful relationship with God. The relational flow is two ways. It is sustained in prayer, but the prayer is not petitions and trying to make God do things my way. The prayer is the deepest communion between us and God, sustained involvement throughout our days and nights, an engagement with God that is unending. A daily time of prayer is essential to this relationship, but throughout the days we are keeping an inner ear attuned to what the Lord is saying to us and lifting up our concerns, objections, questions like this one. I hear what you're saying, Lord, but tell me, how am I to approach it? It's a pretty constant dialogue we are to maintain with the Lord. Our part is to keep listening, to surrender to the person, the event, the thing that is before us, to be present to what is happening, to bring all our heart, mind, soul, and body to the moment and to God, to be vigilant about any deviation from God's laws within us, particularly in our attitudes, but also in our actions. We're not doing this to punish ourselves or judge ourselves. Rather, our motive is to open the door constantly to the Holy Spirit, giving him permission to enter into that part of our life, to transform it. God needs our permission to enter, given our free will, particularly into the deep hidden places of shame and guilt. What we get from this deep relationship is amazing. We're healed of so much trauma, shame, guilt, and tendencies to sin. As all these healings happen, in most cases gradually, more and more of our true self, our deep soul self, is revealed. Our purpose begins to be clarified, and we are in essence stripped of all that would divert us from God, of all that is not real and true for us, of all that is not about our purpose here on earth. I am talking about a life centered in God, a full, fulfilling life where the love that we are experiencing from God, the flow of sustenance and needs met as they come up, the whole person loved as he or she is, forgiven and blessed, that all of this flows out from us to other people, loving, embracing, helping, forgiving, being patient with, kind to. The river of love that has just flowed from the Father to us now has to flow out to everyone else from us. For love knows no boundaries, no judgments, no expectations. It flows out to everyone. It is not stingy or contingent or dependent on the other's right actions. It just flows. It doesn't ask if this is a good person. It just flows. It doesn't discriminate. It just flows. This is the life that Jesus envisioned and modeled for us. That, in a nutshell, is what I think Jesus tried to teach us, that everything flows out of this deep relationship with God. Too often we start at the other end, with the cart before the horse. We start with following the laws. It's natural for us to do this because everything we have learned from childhood on is to first obey the rules. But this is also the basis for our big misunderstanding of Jesus' message and what he modeled. We think that by following the rules, God will love us. And the truth is that God already loves us and forgives us. No amount of rule following or good behavior on our part can make it happen. It's already true. You cannot buy God's love by being a good woman or a good man. In fact, following the rules as our chief mode of being with God actually takes us away from him. How's that, you might ask? First, by counting our good behavior as primary, we are building pride in ourselves, not humility. And secondly, we can change our behavior without changing any attitudes at all. We think we can get away with acting good, but our inner state belies what our behavior is trying to prove. On the other hand, if we start with loving God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, Jesus' Great Commandment, then everything else will flow out of that love, including the second Great Commandment, to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. But first, we have to build a relationship with God, a close dependency. To participate in the love of God that will transform who we are, we have to be in a co-creative relationship with God in our lives. We have to listen most of all for what God is trying to tell us about what needs to change, what we need to do next, the direction we're to go in, and so much more. We need to take all that information from God and put it ahead of any agenda of our own. In fact, we just have to give up our expectations, our assumptions about life, our judgments about ourselves and others, because they are all culturally based. Whatever we cling to that is not God has to go. I learned this lesson when my husband was suffering from a recurrence of cancer, just 2 months after he had been declared cancer-free. He was back in the hospital, and I was dragging myself through the days. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd be wishing it was bedtime so that I could crawl under the covers and shut out the reality I was facing. Then, I was given to understand if I could hold all possible outcomes equally. Well then, that was the message. As soon as I was able to give up clinging to his living in the healthy state I wanted him in, and to hold all outcomes equally, my energy returned, and I was filled with joy and sorrow. Then I was given the gift of faith so deep that it felt like I was the house built on rock, that nothing, not even the death of my husband, could bring me down off that rock, my faith in God. God showed me the attitude that would carry me through these days and gave me the gift of faith to sustain me. Both are with me to this day. My husband died a few weeks later, but I've been able to support and love him and our kids and our friends throughout this time. These gifts from the Lord are still with me today. In any situation, there are tons of possible outcomes. Who are we to say we have the right one in mind? In retrospect, my husband's life had been healed of all the childhood trauma he had suffered, and he had been living from his true self for some time. I think he was ready to go, had done his life's work by then. When I think of all that God taught me through my husband's illness and death, I stand in awe. Fortunately, I heard what he said. I allowed all my wishes, expectations, and assumptions about my life to fall away in favor of God being the true authority in my life. So much of our lives and how we think and feel are ruled by the culture, even the culture of the church. We cannot let what the church teaches stand in the way of God showing us what He wants us to understand. We have to let God show us who He is. Only when we've put God first, really first above everything we've been taught, can we have the dynamic relationship we were born to have. Anytime we limit God by what we believe about Him and don't let Him teach us who He is, we have put God in a box and we can only be a certain way with Him. That box is a human creation built out of human needs, not a divine creation. We have to let God be who He is and let Him show us who He is. If we are to love God with all of ourselves, we have to let go of preconceptions and limitations. Really, who are we to say who God is? Jesus not only taught us this truth, He lived it. Jesus followed God's plan for him despite his own very human misgivings about it. He warned his followers. He tried to bargain with God in Gethsemane. He stood before Pilate. He carried his cross and died upon it. He kept his eyes on God. When we are truly listening to God, truly putting Him first in our lives, surrendered to what He offers us, then and only then do we no longer have to worry about God's laws, because we are resting in God's arms. And in the arms of love, there's no way we can violate God by not following His laws. We don't have to think about following them. We are living them. It takes quite a long time to get there, a lot of dedication, a lot of soul searching for our self-made obstacles to heeding God's call. And even then, the majority of the transformative effort comes from God. We can present ourselves to God, but only He can do the deep transforming of our very nature. Of course, we think about the law and where we're clearly deviating from it, but we keep our eyes on God and on trying to bring all of who we are under His kingdom and love. Some of our greatest strides will come from taking the judgment off ourselves, accepting that we are who we are, mistakes and all, for embracing ourselves as we are. We no longer have anything to hide from God or anyone else. No more need for walls or false fronts to keep us looking good. We can finally relax into the totality, the reality of who we are. Then we are really ready to accept what God has in store for us. We are no longer operating from the ego or false self. We are no longer demanding this or that to serve ourselves. We are simply ready to serve God in whatever way we are called. To serve God in whatever way we're called is to live in the kingdom, in God's presence and love. The kingdom is our goal and our miracle. It's the place of the greatest freedom for us, because we now live out our purpose and agenda that was implanted in us at our conception. We are no longer trying to be who we are not. We are just ourselves, doing what we were created to do. I recently worked with a recording engineer who loves his work. It's easy for him, effortless, I think, because it runs so close to the vein in which he was created. We all have that effortless, natural place. Now, fulfilling our purpose is not without challenges, but God is with us every step of the way, guiding, leading, healing, challenging, supporting, and loving. No longer is there any separation from God or from our purpose. All is integrated. All is transparent. All is love. Out of the deep relationship with God flows all else. All of Jesus' teachings flow out of the 2 Great Commandments, the Beatitudes and the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, the parables and the teachings about the kingdom. All are contained in these 2 commands, to love God with all of ourselves and love others. It's what he challenged the Pharisees and the scribes about. They followed the law religiously, but missed the point of the law, which is love. Thank you for watching. I look forward to hearing from you soon.